They called him many names. Some whispered, the maniac from Angarsk. Others called him, the werewolf. To most, he was nothing more than a faceless terror haunting the streets of Siberia. But behind the shadows and the horror, behind the trail of bodies that stretched across 2 decades, there was a man who lived among them, who wore a badge, who had a family, and who killed without mercy. His name was Mikhail Popkov. And he would become one of the most prolific serial killers in Russian history. It begins in the quiet Siberian city of Angarsk in the early 1990s. The Soviet Union had collapsed, the country was drifting in chaos, and in that chaos, predators found space to thrive. Angarsk was an industrial town, not rich, not poor, just ordinary. The streets were often dim, the neighborhoods lonely, and the winters brutally cold. It was the kind of place where you might think nothing extraordinary could happen. But in those darkened streets, women began to disappear. Some were found the next day, their bodies left in the woods or abandoned in empty lots. Others were never found at all. The bodies told their own stories. Women in their 20s, 30s, sometimes older, were discovered strangled, beaten, or stabbed. The murders were brutal, vicious, often accompanied by sexual assault. At first, investigators thought they might be isolated crimes, random acts of violence in a time when crime was soaring everywhere in Russia. But as the years passed, a pattern began to emerge, a signature too consistent to be ignored. What no one could imagine was that the man responsible was someone who had sworn to uphold the law. Mikhail Popkov was born in 1964, a child of Soviet Siberia. He grew up in Irkutsk Oblast, in an ordinary family, not poor, not rich, nothing to suggest the darkness that lay beneath. As a young man, he joined the police force, became a patrol officer, married, had a daughter. To his neighbors, he was polite, even friendly. To his colleagues, he was reliable, disciplined, the kind of officer you could trust. But Popkov harbored a secret hatred, a twisted compulsion that he would later describe in chillingly simple words: he wanted to cleanse the streets of immoral women. In his mind, women who drank, who went out at night, who accepted rides from strangers, they were impure. They deserved punishment. And he would be the one to punish them. He used his position as a police officer to lure victims, driving a service car or presenting himself as a man of authority. Women trusted him. They thought he was helping them, offering a ride home, a sense of safety. Instead, he drove them to isolated places, forests, abandoned roads, the outskirts of Angarsk. There, his true self emerged. The assaults were merciless. Some victims were stabbed dozens of times. Others were raped, then strangled. Many of the bodies were left exposed to the elements, as if he wanted them to be found, to send a message of fear. And fear spread. Women in Angarsk whispered about the killer who prowled at night. Parents warned their daughters not to accept rides from anyone, not even from the police. But the killer remained elusive. For years, investigators were baffled. The murders stretched from the early 1990s into the 2000s. Victims piled up. Families mourned. And yet, the man responsible continued his double life. By day, he wore the uniform of law and order. By night, he became a monster. The police conducted investigations, but they were plagued by mistakes. Forensic science in Russia at the time was limited, DNA testing was in its infancy, and coordination between departments was poor. More than once, they interviewed Popkov as part of routine checks, but no one suspected him. He was one of their own. The idea that a fellow officer could be the killer seemed unthinkable. And Popkov knew this. He used his badge as a shield. He knew how investigations worked, how to avoid leaving evidence, how to deflect suspicion. Years turned into decades. The body count rose. Later, Popkov would admit to killing more than 80 women, though investigators believe the true number may be higher. He killed until 2010, when he finally stopped. Not because he wanted to, but because his health was failing. He had contracted syphilis, and his strength was declining. The monster that had terrorized Angarsk was growing old. For a time, the killings ceased. The city breathed easier. People thought maybe the nightmare was over. But the scars remained. It was not until 2012 that the breakthrough came. Investigators, using new DNA technology, reviewed old cases. They matched DNA from crime scenes to Popkov's relatives. This led them directly to him. After nearly 2 decades of evading justice, the Angarsk Maniac was arrested. At first, he denied everything. But as evidence mounted, he began to confess. And once he started, the confessions did not stop. He told investigators about murder after murder, describing them in chilling detail, often without remorse. To him, it was almost routine, like recounting old memories of work. What shocked many was not just the scale of his crimes, but the coldness with which he spoke of them. He described killing women as a kind of mission, a way to cleanse society. In his warped mind, he saw himself as an executioner of those who strayed from his vision of morality. But the truth was simpler: he was a predator, using power, trust, and violence to dominate and destroy. In court, the details horrified the public. Survivors and relatives of victims sat in silence as Popkov described how he chose his targets, how he lured them, how he ended their lives. He was sentenced to life in prison, the harshest penalty available in Russia. But for many, the sentence was not enough. Dozens of families would never see their daughters, their sisters, their mothers again. Entire communities had been scarred. Even in prison, Popkov continued to confess to more murders. The number grew until he became one of the most prolific serial killers not only in Russia, but in the world. His story is a reminder of how evil can hide in plain sight, how a man with a badge, a neighbor, a husband, a father, can also be a monster. The fear he spread in Angarsk never fully disappeared. To this day, people remember the years when women vanished, when bodies appeared in the snow, when the streets seemed haunted by an invisible predator. They remember locking their doors earlier, warning their daughters, living with the knowledge that the killer was still out there. And when they learned it had been a police officer, someone they thought was there to protect them, the betrayal cut even deeper. In interviews, Popkov has sometimes shown a twisted pride, boasting of his crimes, claiming he was stronger, smarter, destined to kill. Other times, he has spoken almost casually, as if what he did was normal. But nothing about his crimes was normal. They were acts of cruelty, of hatred, of domination. They were the acts of a man who turned his authority into a weapon, who betrayed the uniform he wore, and who left behind a trail of grief that will never truly end. The Angarsk Maniac is now locked away, his reign of terror finally over. But the shadows he left behind remain. His story is one of darkness hidden beneath the surface of ordinary life, of how evil can wear a friendly face, a uniform, even a smile. It is a story that chills not just because of what he did, but because of what it says about trust, about power, about the fragile line between safety and horror. And it is a story that reminds us, sometimes, the real monsters are not the ones we imagine in the dark, but the ones who walk beside us in daylight.